Hey everybody, what up? It is Scuff D here, and tonight we are going to be taking a look at the Emperor's Children's card pool. So let's get to it. Looking at some Horus Heresy Legions here. So going to the Emperor's Children, what they are about is about perfection. That's that's their whole fluff. That's to begin with. They seek the perfection in all things: combat, art, style, functionality, tactical brilliance. So to reward that, they have a neat function that goes with many of their cards. And we'll just take a look here on Andronius to kind of get what perfection is. So perfection does something if playing this card spends all remaining energy. It's basically like a special kind of kicker. It's not really, you're not paying an extra cost for it, but if you time your play right with the cost of your card, you gain that additional benefit. So for instance, this card here deals 2 damage to a troop. However, if you use this card with only 2 energy remaining, you're also going to jam the target. There's a variety of perfection effects that we'll take a look at. Perfection is the only, I think, is only in the Emperor's Children at this point in the game. It's not currently available to any other faction, so that is their special, unique, just in the same way that Rage is functional just to the World Eaters. Perfection is to the Emperor's Children. So let's take a look at the Emperor's Children's Warlords here. Let's go into the let's look at all their cards. Emperor's Children, here we go. So we'll start off with I guess Fabius Bile is your introductory epic warlord. He's easily obtainable, I think, initially. For me, he was actually, when I started the game way back yonder, I had Loken for quite some time, and I got Fabius Bile, and he was my first. I actually had him before I had Tarvitz. He was my first Emperor's Children. He was also my first epic warlord. So he came with 5 additional health, and he let me play another Legion faction outside of Sons of Horus, and I was happy. And his ability leaves a lot to be desired. It's actually changed over time. I should say this, his ability has not changed over time. He's always been pay 2 energy to enhance a friendly troop. What the enhance does is what has changed over time. I want to say about 2 to 3 to maybe 4 different times those effects have been changed. The majority of those changes, except for this last one, if I remember correctly, had a chance to stun as a negative. So he could enhance a friendly troop and they could gain +3/+3. They could gain bloodthirsty. They could gain stealth. They could gain unstoppable. That was very potential. They could gain 1/0/1/0/2, but then they could also stun. So it was kind of a dangerous feature that you didn't use a whole lot. There was a majority of games that I played with Fabius Bile where I was really just using the Emperor's Children's card pool, and then occasionally, like if I had the extra energy to burn and I'd already made an attack, I would use the enhance to see if I had a support troop remaining. Sometimes it would work out. Sometimes if it stunned them, it wouldn't matter because I'd use it on a front line anyway, so they'd still have some use, and that was kind of nice if I was buffing up a front line's health or a front line's attack. So there was some use, but it's not an every turn use, where some of the warlords that you'll see here are, there's never a bad time to use their ability. To go with that, the effects, as I mentioned, have, I think those haven't changed. You still get bloodthirsty as a potential. If I recall correctly, you still get unstoppable and stealth as a potential. I don't know if the percentage or the randomness factor of those has changed at all necessarily, but from what I understand, the most recent change that they made to Fabius Bile here was to remove that stun penalty. So you can now operate freely on your Astartes, or any troops really, because Fabius Bile doesn't care where he gets his stock from. But you results vary. So there's your apothecary there for you. Results will vary. So let's take a look at Fulgrim, and we're just kind of going here in apparently alphabetical or not necessarily rarity order this time. Fulgrim is the pinnacle. He's the Primarch of the Emperor's Children. He's actually the first Primarch to become a Demon Prince, to fall fully under the sway of chaos. He's he's essential to bringing Horus into the fold to some degree. He's an amazing character. He's got so many flaws despite his pursuit for perfection, which actually ultimately leads to him becoming flawed. And in that degree, I mean, you just go on and on about the character itself. Let's talk about the card, okay? So right off the bat, he's got a high initiative, which is great. He's a Primarch. He's got 40 health, which is great. He has a Whispers of Chaos, which we'll take a look at here in a second, and his ability, which is a solid ability. For 2 energy, he adds a random Emperor's Children tactic to your hand. So as we go through this list here, every tactic that you see here that is not a troop has the potential to be randomly spawned by Fulgrim. Sometimes that's mediocre, but most of the game, even if he only uses his ability once, the card that you generate will be useful at some point in the game to various effects. Some of them are amazing, great locks, perfect timing that you want this tactic, and sometimes it's just enough to throw out to be able to trigger another perfection or to gain a temporary bonus. Just having an additional card, more importantly an additional tactic, more importantly an additional Emperor's Children tactic, is a positive. For 2 energy, you don't know what you're going to get, but that also ties into being able to trigger perfection by using that energy ability. He's a toolbox of potential, because he's not drawing those cards from your deck. He's also creating them outside of the deck, and as some cards such as I mean, to a degree, I guess, Jubok, as well as the Mechanicum Priests. Anytime you're creating cards outside of the card pool, that's a strong effect, because it's giving you something that you didn't normally have in addition to what you already have the potential of having. Let's take a look at his Whispers here down at the end. So his Whispers has been adjusted, I think just once, and initially it was a 20. It started out at a 20 energy, and it was reduced -2 every time Fulgrim attacks the enemy warlord. Now it starts out at 18, but it's -1 when he attacks the enemy warlord. So it still kind of triggers at the same time. However, the reduction to it is not as good, and I'll be honest with you. I mean, I've had Fulgrim. He was the first Primarch I got, and man, I ran with him for months. And he took me to Terra, and I felt good there, and he played well. He could finally match Angron, and this is back before Angron was nerfed, so he was a viable force in addition to the Emperor's Children card pool, and that Whispers wasn't a reliance on it, but it was a good end game or late game, especially in a Fulgrim versus Fulgrim, where you could switch to it, and he would become basically become up, attack by 3. Health goes up by 8, and then his 2 energy, rather than spawning a Emperor's Children tactic, gives him the ability to steal 3 health from a unit. So he could take 3 health and gain 3 health for 2 energy. Great effect, very powerful effect, and understandable why he dominated, because people wanted to race to get to his perfection state of Demon Prince, so that they could use that effect and stay alive. And since this has been in place, and the adjustment to this card has been made, I've got to be honest with you, I've never used his Whispers since. You have to attack with him every round and hit the warlord every round, and the meta has changed where that's not as rewarding to do that with Fulgrim. It's better to sit back, use his ability, or use his face strike to deal damage when you need to deal damage as opposed to doing it every turn. So his Whispers does not come into play nearly as much for me. And then you could probably build a deck to get him there. However, in the current state of things, it's not as rewarding because he was going to take a lot of damage. A lot of damage, not just from his attacking straight on, but just from the state of the game, the decks that are dealing out massive damage too. So even if he transforms, it might be too little too late at that point in time. But again, Fulgrim, all-star. There's never anything not to like about Fulgrim. He is one of the top warlords currently in the game. He is one of the top performers currently in the game. That's not just because of his ability, but it is because of the Emperor's Children card pool as a whole and how he complements it and how they complement him. So overall, just a great card. At this point in time, we're not seeing Primarchs in the shop, but if you do, I would probably put Fulgrim, Angron, Corax in the top three. In no particular order. Sometimes that's by taste. If I had to choose between the top four warlords that were out at the initial release of the game, Fulgrim was the one that I wanted. I was glad enough that I got him. It was perfect. So Lucius was the fourth warlord to join the Emperor's Children faction, but he's the third one that we're looking at today, and his ability is interesting. So he, first off, has Battle Honor, which means he can attack again if he kills an enemy after attacking. So that's what Battle Honor means. For him specifically, that's what he gains if he attacks an enemy and kills it. His ability is for 2 energy. He can gain +1/+0 until the end of turn, and he can act again. So this is useful for several different ways. Number one, you're using the 2 energy to up his attack. And right off the bat, you might think that's not much. First turn, he's only up by 3. You don't have any troop on the table. Okay. Second turn, he's up by 2. Now you're not having any troop on the table, but he's doing 4 damage. Maybe you don't use his ability earlier to the game, however. And late game, you use that ability 5 times. And now his attack is 7. And as a closer, 7 damage out the gate to a warlord is pretty lethal. Now the trade-off is he has a 30 health and he has a high initiative, which is actually not a bad thing. High initiative is a good thing all around. The second thing to remember about his ability is he can attack again. So if you're upping his attack, you can maximize the use of it. Now it's a dangerous, it's a two-edged sword, but let's say there is a 3 health troop on the table that's going to pose a problem and that you can't quite deal with whatever you've got in your hand. You can up Lucius to the attack of 3, deal with that troop, and still do 3 damage to your opponent's warlord. Now the trade-off is that Lucius is going to be taking extra damage there. So a deck with Lucius as your warlord really has to be built around getting as much health revival to Lucius as possible, which is not terribly tricky, but it does fill up some card slots and it does kind of limit his options depending on what you've got in your hand or how much health you've got and how you use him. But you've got to keep his health because there's nothing like pumping up his health and clearing a board and you've actually done more damage to yourself than you've done to your opponent. It's great for board control, but if you do that too many times, you are doing more hurt to yourself than good at that point. And then also to go with it, again, it says the 2 energy ability, and with the Emperor's Children card pool in general, even if you're not attacking with him and you need to use that 2 energy to trigger a perfection ability, you can do that. There's nothing wrong with the 6 energy, using Lucius's ability, dropping your energy to 4, and then say drop an Eidichin squad to deal 2 damage, stun a target, and then maybe if you want to attack with Lucius as well. Now you've dealt 5 damage. Sorry, not energy. 5 damage. 3 from Lucius, 2 from this, as well as gaining the stun effect. Maybe you've even dealt more than that if you have a battle honor and you killed somebody, and then you can deal 3 damage to something else if you want to be super ambitious. But again, urge caution with Lucius. You don't see him too often in ladder. You see some decks, I've seen some people play him and test him, and I think he's good. In the current environment, he's not as good because he's running the risk of doing more damage to himself, and current game state is about massive straight damage, so he is at a disadvantage there. But in events that he's been in, it's a 50-50 toss-up. It depends on the other decks and the warlords. He's been strong, and there are times that he's not so strong. Great character. Again, Emperor's Children have got some great characters in their stories, and he is definitely one that we could go on and on about as well. Obviously, this is him before his masochistic fall to chaos side. This is him in his pre-bitter state. Yeah, that's the best way to describe him. But again, that's what Lucius does. So Saul Tarvitz is your normally, like, if you want to buy a starter in the store of Emperor's Children, Saul Tarvitz is the warlord that you get. And out the gate, he doesn't seem to be much. However, Saul Tarvitz is a solid warlord. He has been, and he remains a solid warlord. His ability is free, which is nice, and all it does is reduce the cost of the next card that you play by 1. His initiative is medium, so there's a trade-off there to some degree. His ability allows almost for flawless execution of perfection every turn if you're building your deck around that. It allows for staying actually 1 turn ahead in terms of the curve in playing 3-drop cards on turn 2, 4-drop cards on turn 3, etc., etc., etc. You run the risk of that, of falling behind in cards if you're playing too many cards earlier than they need to be, or you've got too many low-costing cards. However, as a newer player, as your collection grows, and for those players who have played, who have a great deal of cards, that his wealth of potential grows. Licticio Divinatus, Abandoned Supplies, other card drawing cards, cards that are already reducing cards by cost. Spirit of Mars is another good one that's adding cards to your hand at reduced cost, and then he's reducing their cost, or he can reduce the cost of Spirit of Mars, which gets more troops, which reduce cost. There's a lot of potential combos there. One such deck that I ran a couple seasons back that was just kind of a fun thing, and it was a make or break deck, but it had amazing burst potential. Was pairing up Saul Tarvitz with the Tealoth Changers Demons, which are 4 energy, but for every card that you play, they're dealing 1 to 3 damage randomly to a unit. And if you play them around turn 8 with Tarvitz and some of the effects that you'll see here that reduce cost of cards, some of the low cost troops of cards, you could empty your hand of 6 or 7 cards, deal potentially 6 to 18 damage across the board, and then in addition to that have massive board control depending on what you've played, or replenishing your hand for the next turn, and just huge burst potential. Tarvitz also allows for some of the higher cost Emperor's Children's cards to be played earlier, as I've already mentioned, but he's just, you can do so many things with him, in the same degree that you could probably do with Tarvitz, I would argue, for the Sons of Horus. He has less health, he has same initiative, his ability is a little bit different, but in terms of usefulness, in terms of versatility, in terms of variety, you can play Tarvitz, I would probably say, at least 4 different ways that I can think of off the top of my head. So, great warlord. And just as a side note, and I've mentioned this, I think, a couple times every now and then on the Discord chat, this is just something I've always found comical way back. This is original Horus Heresy art that goes back years. For me, when I first looked at this picture, and every time since, Tarvitz looks like if they did a Horus Heresy movie, Tarvitz would be played by Nicolas Cage. That's just my opinion. I'm gonna stick to it. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna just put these things side by side. Let me do a little break here. Let me do a break and see if I've got this in my memes. There you go. That's what I think. That's what I think. I could be wrong. So, all right. Tactical Brilliance. This is the first tactic. This is a rare. You see these in the shop. If you don't have them, pick them up. You want 2 of these in every Emperor's Children's deck. There is no reason not to have this card. its ability speaks for itself. Next card you cost this turn cost 2 less. The best suggestion I can suggest for playing this is don't play it too soon. If you play it too soon, you empty your hand out, and you might throw something down that is easily disposable, and now you're down to 1 card and you're just playing top deck. You gotta be careful when you're using your tactical brilliance. You gotta be brilliant about your tactical brilliance for it to really matter. But this card allows for a lot of potential uses. Again, it also ties into abilities like Tarvitz in terms of helping get your perfection off. You want to be perfect, you got to be brilliant. You want to be brilliant, you got to be perfect. That's just the way it works. Now, Dermosian Squad, I've seen in a few decks. I don't see it in every deck, and I don't see a lot of use for it myself personally. It's a 1 energy, so if you're looking to build a speed deck, or you're looking for 1 energies for a certain reason, again, such as the Telos Changers deck, or as an option to kind of tweak your curve potential for hitting perfection, that's what these guys do. Because if you look at their ability is ridiculous. What's the point? 1 energy, I just return this card to my hand. Well, if you've got a 5 energy turn and you've got a perfection troop that costs 4, trade these guys off, provided they've stayed out on the table, which usually that doesn't happen. Trade these guys off for the 1 energy, put them back up into your hand. Now you've got 4 energy, and you can play your perfection troop. That's what they do. That's what they're for. That's it. And that's why they're easily passed over for the most part, but they do serve a purpose. If you're looking to super work on that perfection, or super work on as many cards out as possible, they're an option. I would pass over them. I would rather go for 2 drops than a 1 drop, in my opinion, but that's just me. So here's a tactic. Again, as an Emperor's Children tactic, all these are possibly created by Fulgrim, so not a bad one. It's only 1 energy, and it stuns an enemy. Now, that could be a warlord, that could be a troop. Doesn't matter if it's a vehicle, doesn't matter if it's infantry, it just stuns them for 1. Doesn't do anything else beyond that. Again, it's a 1 energy. It also helps with the curve in terms of hitting the perfection mark. It's not a bad card. If you're building a deck based around stun, you can pack 2 of these. You can pack Noise Marines, and you can pack Egyptian Squad. You can maybe even go with Eidolon if you really wanted to. I mean, that right there is 2, 4, 6. So that's 7 cards in your deck that can stun an enemy, which is very frustrating. Because if especially if you're stunning their troops, they can't kill your stuff. You have more stuff on the board. So it's all right. It's not what I use, but it's all right. Andronius is another good card. This is their mild damage. Now, for 2, we've already looked at this before. It deals 2 damage with perfection, and this is one of the first perfection tactics that we're looking at. You jam the target. I personally don't like it as much as the other damage cards that are out there, even the chaos damage cards, only for the simple fact that the damage that it's dealing is just to a troop. I prefer cards that deal damage to be able to hit any unit, troop or warlord. The jamming is nice. That's a nice feature, but it's not always going to come into play, because sometimes you just need to do 2 damage to kill somebody. So then the perfection is not a requirement, or it's not desired as much. So here's a troop that is 2 for 3/2, and if you play them with perfection, they gain drop pod, which is going to give them a little extra health. It's going to require an extra step to kill them. That's it. They don't do much else beyond that. There's not much to them. You do see these in certain decks that run Hall of Rights and span lots of troops to drop and gain marks of chaos, because potentially they could go from a 3/2 with drop pod to a 6/2 with drop pod if they hit Mark of Corn. So not bad. If you're looking to build Emperor's Children and you don't have too many cards, or you need low-costing troops, they're probably obviously going to be one of your first go-tos, as well as a couple of these other ones. But as time goes on, you may find that they're not as reliable, or you may find that there's better options. They don't do anything when you kill them. They're not fast, and that's it. I mean, once they're out there, they're just out there to deal 3 damage to something, or to just take 1 hit and die. Concentrated fire is a good good tactic, especially in like a deck with, like I said, the spanning or the spamming of multiple troops with Hall of Rights, or in a Lucius build, because let's say for 2 energy you've got 3 troops on the table. You can use his ability to give you +1, or you could use this to give him +3, and then, and this is, it also includes your forever unit, so this would include your warlord himself. So if there's 3 units, technically it's +4, and then use his ability if you've got 4 energy. So he would go to attack 7 for 4 energy. Now that requires there to be troops on the table, but it's a low cost tactic, so it's a very viable. It just kind of depends on the game state where you're at. It might be used for a killing blow, it might be used just to do a little niche of a damage. It's not a bad tactic. Now Rethrin Platoon, their perfection ability is very simple. They don't buff up much, but they draw you a card. And for those decks that are playing a lot of low cost stuff, you're going to run out of cards. So that's not a bad thing, especially if you guys play these after playing 3 or 4 other little cheap cards. You finish off with this, you still get a card in hand, you end your turn with a card in hand. That's good. You need cards in your hand, otherwise top decking is not reliable, and you will find yourself quickly running out of steam. So good ability. I think these guys pair wonderfully with Tarvitz, especially because he needs cards. He's going to go through them faster, but they work in Fulgrim also. They work in Lucius. You could probably make the argument for them in Fabius Bile, I suppose, too. I mean, you'd have to make the argument to play Fabius Bile. That's my opinion. I wouldn't say Fabius Bile is like unplayable, but out of the 4 warlord options, if I had to rank the warlords just really quickly here, I would go Fulgrim, Tarvitz, Lucius, and Fabius in that order from best to worst. So Saverin Squad is one that I like. Its perfection gives it a little boost. That's it. Just gains +1/+1. So if you use it for 2, you're getting a 3/3. There's no extra additional effect to it, but it's a little bit more survivable than Rethrin. You're not getting an extra card, so you kind of have a choice between those two. What do you want? What are you looking for? What do you prefer? I personally prefer Saverin, just in the addition that a warlord just can't straight out kill it with a face strike. They've got to use something in addition to a face strike, and if they are doing that, then they're taking 3 instead of 2. So there's a little bit of a trade-off. That's just my opinion. That's the way I look at it. So Acidin Squad, these are a good solid 3-drop, and they're actually one of maybe only a handful of odd-numbered troops when you look at it that are good with the Emperor's Children. So that's kind of something to kind of keep in mind depending on how you want your numbers to line up for deck construction. Because if you have too many even numbers, then you can only do perfection when it's an even number turn. So if you have some odd numbered cards in your deck, that helps throw that off, and then all of a sudden you have the potential to do perfection every turn if you're not playing Tarvitz. Tarvitz just has that potential every turn because he can make that or break that as he chooses. So their ability, first off, they're a 3/4, so they've got 4 health, which is good because getting above that 3 health hump is important to stay on the table. And then they've got deal 2 damage. It's an ability that deals low damage, but it deals damage. They don't have to attack. They can ping something that they want. They could take out a troop if they want. They could drop something for lower health for something else to finish off. I like them. They're not bad. You could make the argument to include 2 or just a 1-up in the deck, but they're a solid troop. Now Arrowhorn, this is one that more likely I've only seen play probably in event decks, and then when Fulgrim randomly creates it in my hand. I'm not a fan of it. I think its ability is overcost for what it does, as well as the perfection. So what it does is it returns a friendly troop to your hand, which is not terrible when you think about it. Melgator is a 2-drop character that has the potential to do the same thing. He can affect your opponent's characters as well, but if you want to get something back, you could get that back for 2. However, its perfection has reduced its cost by 2. Well, I don't know how beneficial that perfection is if I've spent my last 3 energy to pick up a unit then I can't play it unless it was a 2-drop unit to begin with. And if it's a 2-drop unit, as we see here, 1, 2, 3, there, aside from Wraithrin Squad to draw an additional card, there's no benefit to playing those guys. So it's not as great. There's no rally, there's no fast. That's the hang up with me for this card. So yes, you're returning something to your hand. If you want to benefit most from it, you've got to use the last energy to pull something so you can use that card on your next turn potentially. But then why not just have 3 energy to play a troop, a 3 energy troop that actually can do something that turn. I would rather go that way than use this card. For the Emperor is a good tactic. It reduces the cost of all cards in your hand by 1. Don't play this if you only have 2 or 3 cards in your hand. Wait until you get a card or extra 2 in your hand to get the full benefit. If you're just playing this because you're at 3 energy and it's turn 3 and you've got that and 2 other cards that you haven't played yet, unless they're super high cost and you're kind of desperate, I'd wait till turn 4 to play this card if you could avoid it. Because otherwise you're just not going to get the benefit. And you might actually be more beneficial by turn 6 when you've got 4 plus cards in your hand that are going to be reduced in cost, because each one of those will snowball the other, especially if you've got several of those with perfection. A good card, a good effect, a decent cost. If you're playing Tarvitz, you could pull this off turn 2, but again, I would urge against that because you're only affecting then 2 cards in your hand, and that's just not worth it. Hall of Rights. Now, as I mentioned, Hall of Rights here, there are certain builds that use this. It is an epic. It's a little bit hard to get. You see it in the shop from time to time, and if you're interested in it and you've got lots of low-cost troops that are not demons, you can build a deck. It's very easy to build. It's a little random because what it does is non-demon troops gain Mark of Chaos when you play them. So you don't know what you're going to get. You might get Mark of Nurgle, which currently is the worst. You might get Sneak Attack. There's been games where just for some reason every troop seems to get the same mark, and usually it's Sneak Attack or it's Mark of Corn. And you're like, why? How is that? How random is that you can play 4 units and they each stand a 25% chance to get a mark, and each one of them got that same. I mean, that's the odds of that. Technically, if you're playing this 25 to someone could do the math on that and tell you how the odds work. But by the same token, in this game, the random element factor just can be way out there in terms of how it works sometimes. So it's a 3-drop cost. It's got 7 health. So if you get this out on turn 3, unless your opponent has Melgator ready to go and bounces this back to your hand, this card is going to stay out for at least a turn or 2, which is 2 plus troops that you're going to gain those effects. And depending on the effects that they get, that could really be a huge advantage, which is why you see Hall of Rights decks. They're not the only Emperor's Children's deck out there, but this is such a great card. It's a rally thing. You don't have to pay any energy for it. You just have to put it down and then play cards after it, and you gain a benefit. And you don't know what benefit you're going to gain, but there's never a bad thing of gaining a benefit. That's why they call it a benefit. Colana Squad. For a 3 cost, they're kind of the flip side of the 3/4. They're a 4/3, which makes them that vulnerability. Having that 3 health is a fine edge. It depends on what you're looking for. Now they have a perfection, and their perfection gives them unstoppable, which there's actually not too many Emperor's Children troops that have unstoppable. I think these guys actually might be the only ones. We'll see as we look up on here. And 4 attack is kind of beefy, so that's not too bad, but that's it. So they gain an unstoppable, which is not an instantly offensive ability, and they have a decent attack, but I've seen them in event decks, and I have seen them with people playing them, particularly Hall of Rights decks, because they're 4 health, and in the event that they get a Mark of Corn, it you have a 7 health troop. That's understandable. I can see that. If I don't have something that deals 3 damage on my turn, I'm gonna be hurting. So they have their uses. It just depends on how you're using them. They shouldn't be an auto go-to, but they definitely have their uses. So now here's just a great versatile tactic for the Emperor's Children. It's a common peak condition. Artwork's neat. Give a friendly troop +1/+1 for each enemy unit. Now this varies in the game depending on how many units they've got out, and this includes their warlord. So at the very least, you're going to give a unit +1/+1. It's better if they've got 2 units out because then they can get +2, +3, especially on a noise marine that they didn't kill. And then you're buffing up his health as well as his attack, which makes him out there longer. It's a good card. You'll find that the Emperor's Children actually are the only legion currently that have the ability to up the health of their troops instantly. The Salamanders have a way to do it via sacrifice. The Iron Hands have the ability to do it via relentless abilities on certain troops, or on trigger abilities on some of their troops. And Vincent 6 in the Raven's Guard has it to use as an ability, but it just ups the health. This ups both the health and the attack as an instant for 3, which one of my favorite things way back when Lucius was not a warlord, he was actually a unit. He was there. He was a 7-drop, if I remember correctly, 7 or 9. I might be thinking 7 because I would play the reduce, the tactical brilliance on him. But if he stayed out on the table and they had 4 or 5, he had a great ability where he could just act again. That was his thing. So you pump up his attack and then you just clear house with him, and he'd just wipe out all their health. So that was a great combo. But this is still a good card in general. Depends on how you want to pump up your troops. So you've got peak conditions, and then you've got unbreakable focus, which we'll take a look at here in just a sec. So Tiberlin bikes. These guys, I don't want to say they're a staple in every Emperor's Children deck, but I feel like they are, at least when for my stuff, for the most part. There's been a couple times I've passed on them because they're a vehicle. They're susceptible to Direct Rask in the Death Guard, who can just instant kill vehicles with his. So he can take 3, but he just destroys it. Or Crack Grenade. Or I think that's just about it. That really like instant negative effects vehicles. There's a few bigger cards, but then he's just a 3-drop, so he's not like huge to begin with. But he has sneak attack. That's great. That's huge if you're buffing him up, especially like at a Fabius Bile, or just as we saw, peak conditions. You could easily turn this guy into a huge sneak attack beast, and now he's just sitting back, dealing damage, and they've got to come at him face to take that damage. That's why I like him. Sneak attack is probably, it's a toss-up between sneak attack and like a Marker Corn type effect that just ups the attack straight up in terms of which is better. But anytime there's a sneak attack troop on the table, people try to take him out, so they become targets. If they can manage to stick around just for 1 turn extra than anticipated, then they're doing their job. Now, Unbreakable Focus is another way to buff up your units. This is across the board, and this is for your troops. And this gives them +1/+1. And if you play it with just 3 energy left, now you're giving them an additional +1/+1. So for 3 energy, if you time it right in terms of your play, you can give all your troops +2/+2. And that really adds up if you think about it, and you've got 2 or 3 cheap, low troops on the table. Your opponent might balk at them initially. Maybe they don't kill them. Maybe they don't have enough to kill them all, so you've got 2 left. You play another troop. Now you pump everything up, and now your 2/2s and your 3/3s are 4/4s and 5/5s, just like that. And that means that they're going to stick around longer, and that means they're going to do more damage, and they're going to keep the board clear for you, and they're going to give you more time to do more things to them. Unbreakable Focus is a great card. It's not, it's a common, it's very versatile. Unless you are running super light on troops, it's not something to overlook. It's something to consider using at least one of in every Emperor's Children's deck, if not Unbreakable Focus, peak conditions. And I would argue more for Unbreakable Focus, only for the simple fact that it affects all your troops, same cost, and it's not contingent upon your opponent. There are a lot of things in the meta right now that your opponent is running less troop cards that you're not going to see the benefit of peak conditions as much as you would as an Unbreakable Focus. You can easily get the +2/+2, whereas the peak condition, you're kind of relying on your opponent to get that. Now, discipline is a tactic that I think needs to be reworked. Some people might feel the same for its cost. It's a 4 energy. It heals 1 tier warlord for every enemy, which is great if your opponent has a lot of troops or units on the table. At the very least, it's going to heal 1. But when you think about that, for 4 energy, I'm going to heal 1. When there are troops in the Mechanicum, then I can pay 2 to heal 3, or 3 to heal 3 and remove stun. That doesn't add up. Now, their perfection is it also can heal your troops. However, as we've seen so far, most of the Emperor's Children troops are kind of light health, so it may not matter anyways if you're healing your troops, unless you've enhanced their health or there's something that is just eking out there. It's not your normal go-to. It's not something that you're normally going to play. Lucius does need it. I think he would need at least 1. I think, again, he needs as many options to heal as possible. But its impact and its effect requiring your opponent to play more troops puts you at a disadvantage. The cost puts you at a disadvantage. I think if it was heal 2 to your warlord for every enemy for 4, that would be a better effect. Now, that might be overpowered when you really think about it, but it would be better for the cost. So I pass on this one myself. I have to just through the course of packs, picking it up, but I don't ever use this card. There are times where I'll use it if it's generated by Fulgrim, but it's not something I go to. So Edison Squad. These guys, as we've shown here before, rally. They deal damage when they come into play, and if it's that perfection, they're stunning the target too. These guys are they're just a reliable unit. If you're playing against Emperor's Children, turn 4, you can almost expect either these guys or their bikes to come out and do something, whether they're going to stun you or deal more damage. That's just what they do. That's just what these guys do. It's really great to stun an Angron or to stun a Korax, and they don't have an answer to that on their turn. It buys you that extra time. These guys stay on the table. Now after that, they're just a 3/3, but again, if you're planning to buff your cards, or if you've got Hall of Rights and they come out and they gain a mark, they've got something extra to do more while they're out there on play. So good, reliable. I'd make the argument for a staple. That's myself, but it depends on your build. You might want to have lower cost stuff. Hold at all costs is currently the only Emperor's Children legendary that I need left, and it's not one I'm actively seeking. It's good, but only in certain instances. Its ability is great, refills your energy, and if you're perfection, if you hold no cards, which is technically a second perfection if you think about it, you get a drive 5 cards. So I mean that's the part that just kind of for me, like, okay, I have to play it to get me to 0 energy, and then if I have no cards, I get 5 cards. Now the benefit of that is if you do happen to play a speed through your hand deck and you've got a bunch of low cost cards, having no cards in hand is not going to be difficult. And then gaining your full energy, especially if you're at like turn 8 plus, gaining 8 more energy as well as 5 cards to continue whatever you're doing. For instance, Changer's Abuse. That's great. That's a good payoff. But it's that secondary conditioning that just kind of it's not bad. I don't have it, so the only time I ever see it is if it's created by Fulgrim. I don't use it all the time, but it's nice when I do. I won't say no to it. I don't know if I would include it in every deck, but again, I think it just depends on what you're building it for. So Laertes Squad. Now these guys are interesting, and if you're a starter, starting out with the Emperor's Children, you might have some of these in your deck a little bit more. Their perfection is they gain +1/+1 for each friendly Astartes troop, which is actually not bad when you think about it. You're like, oh, I could get 3 or 4 guys out, and these guys become, +3/+4 or whatever. They're going to be a 7/7 or an 8/8/7 or. But depending on your build, you have to take a look at if they're Astartes or not. That's important. The first few decks I ran with them, I found myself including a lot more vehicles or a lot more just general infantry as opposed to Emperor's Children Astartes. So the chances of them actually gaining a benefit were minimal. In addition to that, with them being a 4-drop troop, I found myself having better 4-drop options, and gradually Laertes Squad kind of got phased out for my decks. It has a niche, I think, earlier in collecting it for newer players, but I think as time goes on, with what's already out there at 4 cost, those guys are replaceable. Longevous is a required 2 of. It's a common, so it should not be too hard to get. This is the instant damage, just general damage card that the Emperor's Children have. So for 4 energy, it's dealing 3 damage, and if the target dies, you draw 2 cards. It's not a perfection ability, but it is a contingent ability, however, it gets you cards. And cards in hand are important. Every legion, every faction will show that, will demonstrate that. You need options, you need to have stuff in hand, especially if you're looking to set up perfection combos. You need to have stuff in hand. This card deals 3 damage. 9 times out of 10, you're going to use it to get the 2 card draw. It just is, it's just in the same way that you've got Chariot of the Gods for the Sons of Horus, dealing 4 damage and drawing you a card. This one here is dealing 3 damage with the potential to draw you 2 cards. Even trade, 2 of, easily stapled. I would probably say there's no reason for it not to be a staple in Emperor's Children. So here's the Emperor's Children jet bikes that I was talking about earlier. These guys here, their perfection is they gain +2/+0 until the end of turn, and they're fast. So turn 4, you've got a 5/4 coming out, and most likely that 5 is going to go and hit the Warlord. However, late game, that 5 becomes a really good offensive tactic against whatever big beef thing that they've got. Maybe they've got a front line. Maybe they've got Melgator or something sitting on the table. So these guys are very good. Fast troops. Currently in the game, there's just no reason not to run fast if you have it, if you have the option. If you have Mycellus bikes and you've got goldstones, if you like those guys, that's 4 fast troops, and if you play them in the same turn, that's potentially 8 damage to something. So keep that in mind. They are a vehicle, so susceptible to, whatever deals vehicles, but with 4 health and doing an attack the first turn that they come out, they're not going to live much longer beyond that, but for what they do, they deal some additional damage. Now, Odovacar, he's a solid troop. You see him in event decks because he's an epic. He's a good epic. He's an Astartes. He's a 4 cost, and his perfection gives him frontline. So at 4, you're going to get a frontline. And his ability is a really good ability. He can give +1/+1 to a friendly troop, which includes himself. So at the very least, if you don't have other troops, you can pump his health and his attack up. The problem is that time frame that he's coming into play. He's coming in at turn 4, and that's when you start to see those destruction cards. That's when you see the jet bikes. That's when you see things that deal enough damage to deal with him right out the gate. So Odovacar is a good card. He actually functions better if you are able to pull off a first turn tactical brilliance with him. And that would probably be, I would probably say, first turn tactical brilliance for Odovacar or first turn tactical brilliance for Noise Marines. Might be the only exception that I would say play those as soon as you could. And that's, even then, it depends on the matchup, because, man, it would suck if you played that and they just played Jubok and then you burn 2 cards. But, not Jubok, Melgator, I'm sorry. but he's a good card. Is he included in every deck? It depends on your build. It depends on where your energy count is. It depends on where your cost stuff is at. But definitely one to heavily consider. And if you don't have too many epics, then I would say definitely urge him in. He's a frontline. Frontline is always good. High health. Okay, that's good. And he's got something that he does while he's on the table, so not bad. Now, Ruined Palace, I think, is probably my least favorite tactic of the Emperor's Children out of all the tactics. Even the stunned, and it's not great. First off, it gives Mark of Chaos to Astartes troops for 4 energy. So hang on, for 4 energy, I can give Mark of Chaos to just Astartes troops. Or I could play a 3 energy thing that stays on the table, and then everything I play that's not demon gains a Mark of Chaos. So just take a look at the... Now, granted, this is a common, and that is an epic. So rarity playing into a factor there. But once you have one of those, why would you ever play this? Perfection. Oh, also give it +1/+1. Well, that's only going to apply to Astartes. And again, take a look at your cards in your deck. Do you have enough Astartes to actually benefit from it, or are you actually running infantry and vehicles? In which case, is Ruined Palace ever really going to be valid for you? If it is, great. But it just, when they're trekking across the planets, the Emperor's Children pass on the Ruined Palace, and they like to spend time in the Hall of Rites. That's really where it comes down to it. Just as soon as you can spend time in the Hall of Rites, take a vacation there, it's perfection. Do it. So Chaplain Carmosian, not a bad epic. He's a 5/5/5/5. He's 5s across the board. And then he has a Backlash, which is a good ability. He gives it a non-demon troops Mark of Chaos. So if you've got those little weenie guys out there on the table, you've got even just one, they kill a 5/5, and your opponent does not want a 5/5 sticking around too long, so you know they're going to kill him. And if they don't, then you slam him into something for 5 damage or 10 damage before he dies. He makes up his value really quick. The trade-off is he's a 5 cost, so we're starting to get into the higher cost cards for the Emperor's Children. So it really does depend on your deck. It does depend on your build and what you're looking for. Are you going to see him every time? Are you going to use him every time? It's up to you. It's up to what you've got. It's up to what you're going for. It's not bad. I would rank it just as a solid card. Not always useful, but useful. Now, Odysseus Squad, when you're starting out, they're rare. You might get these guys, and you need a high damage and a high attack card, and these guys seem good. Their Battle Honor seems good. And here's the important thing to keep in mind with Battle Honor. This troop has to survive that attack. So not only does it have to attack and kill an enemy, it has to live too. And he's got 4 health. There are ways to buff up the health of this card. However, if you don't, what you're really doing is you just have a 6/4 troop. You're not going to get the Battle Honor. I think I've only ever successfully used his Battle Honor one time. He becomes a target because he's got 6, but he's really an overpriced target. He doesn't do anything for you beyond that. He's really good at, hacking down some Ogren frontline troops, and that's kind of about it. He's not gonna make the cut. Although it's a great picture, I like the art. Noise Marines. Now, out of the 5-drop troops that we've seen so far, Chaplain, Uslan, and Odysseus, the Noise Marines are my pick. They're lower health again. They've also got 4 health too, and they've got 1 less attack than the Battle Honor guy. But when attacking, stun the target and adjacent units. That's up to 3 units that these guys can stun, even if they die when they make that attack. 3 units. And as I mentioned, if you up their health just by 1 or 2 with focused, then these guys are sticking around longer. Also, they're dealing wicked damage. They're just shocking people left and right. And they are easily a target when they hit. If your opponent can, and they're smart about it, they would probably better take the 5 direct to the face on their turn and kill him as quickly as possible, as opposed to try to avoid it. Because even if they throw up a frontline troop next to their warlord to try to stave off Noise Marine, Noise Marine is going to come in. He's going to kill that frontline troop or do enough damage to it to bring it low, stun that frontline troop, and stun your warlord. It's just that these are one of the units, and there's not too many, but these are one of the units that you have, that placement of your troops or your opponent's troops comes into play. Because if they're playing a game and they're not keeping in mind the 5 and the Noise Marines, or they don't think that you're going to play them, or you're playing against Emperor's Children, you want to try to put your frontline stuff as far away from your warlord as possible for this instance, because that's the first thing that they can attack, and if they attack it, you don't want them stunning. If you can have you got 3 spots here, warlord, and then 3 spots over here. If you can put your front lines all the way to those far end spaces, that's where you want them for these guys to minimize the impact. But just out of the 5, I prefer that. Stunning is just a great thing. It's hard to do because they have 4 health, but when you do it, it's nice. So here's an interesting vehicle. As a starter, and I think I ran this just because I needed some high health, high damage cards back in Fabius Bile days, which, again, Fabius Bile I think just took me to Prospero, and then I got Karn, and then things really opened up. But Sirius Rhino has got a 0 ability, and your next Astartes' turn costs 2 less. That's not bad, because he's reducing. He's kind of got a built-in tactical brilliance for just Astartes. And he has 6 health, so he could stick around. The trade-off is he can't act again, so you're giving up his attack option to bring another troop into play. The current shift in the game really doesn't reward that style. You might see these in some event decks, some lower level decks where people are testing their feet in the Emperor's Children, but as time goes on, this card just does not help, does not make sense, doesn't really become anything. It doesn't even put out a unit, it just reduces the cost. So you've got to play something from your hand, and it has to be Astartes. It cannot be a vehicle, cannot be a demon, cannot be an infantry. So it's that kind of that mid-ground card. I'd rank it low, not maliciously, just for the simple fact that it's replaceable as time goes on. Now, Agnomen. Probably, I would probably put this in the top 3 perfection abilities. Yeah, I'd say probably top 3, and that might be saying a lot, but for 6, you're getting a tank. It's an easily disposable tank. It's a Predator, 7-5. Looks like a Predator Annihilator. Although, is that an autocannon or a las cannon? I don't know. 7-5 and perfection, it's going to deal 4 damage to the enemy warlord. And most of the time, that's easily obtainable. 7-5, 4 damage, straight off to the enemy warlord. That's enough to end a game. That's enough to close the game out. That's just a solid hit, solid strike. And then, if they can't, stun, kill, deal with Agnomen to some degree, they're going to take another 7. Now, at this point in the game, with the 6 drop, that's doable. There's a lot of things that can deal 5 damage. There's a lot of combos to deal 5 damage or to get them back. You don't necessarily want to do a Melgator and return Agnomen to your opponent's hand, because you just give them the option to deal 4 more damage to you in another turn or 2, depending on how they combo it. But these are just solid closers, and nothing hurts more than getting hit by 2 of these in a game, because that's 8 damage, as well as having to deal with 2 of these troops on the table. It's I wouldn't say the closer. It's a great mid to end game option for Emperor's Children. Now, Enhanced Warrior is terrible. I'm just gonna say it. way overpriced. It's good if you're starting out and you're new to the game and you're a newer player and you're playing low-level games, and you need this card in your hand first turn in order to truly benefit from it. The problem with that is it takes up a spot in your opening hand, and your opening hand is so critical to survival, really. So you're giving up a slot to have a troop that is going to gain +1/+1 when an enemy dies. But if you don't have any troops on the table, it's going to be hard for you to kill those enemies. So at best, and I think the best one I've ever had was like a 5/6 when I dropped it. Maybe a 6/7 thanks to a defensive satellites play for 6, and that's it. And it's an Astartes, and that's after battling it out and having this dead card in my hand for far too long. Why do that when right off the bat I can have a 7/5 that deals 4 damage for the same cost? There's no, like, let's just say for 4 turns I kill 4 things. That makes this a 6/7, or I could have a 7/5 plus 4 damage. Mathematically, this one is still superior. So as soon as you have the option, if you're looking for a 6, get rid of this guy. Don't use that guy. Just don't. You're better off with the Ogre and frontline guys than those guys. Come on. Perfection's Flight. This is the Emperor's Children Destroyer troop. Again, every legion currently, except for Raven Guard, have the ability to destroy an enemy troop, depending on what their thing is. Perfection's Flight is a 6 cost, and if it's a perfection, it draws a card. Now that's 1 cost more than Outflank. However, it has the potential to draw a card at 6. If you think about it, that's for 1 energy more. That's not bad, even though it's contingent. But you need to have a way to destroy troops. So 6 is kind of 6 or 4, depending on if they've got tactical brilliance, or maybe even 5 with Tarvitz, is kind of that window where the Emperor's Children can just straight out deal with stuff. If you've got that in hand, or if you're playing against them, that's when you need to keep in mind. That's when they can deal with your big stuff. So get it out before that, or get it out and use it as soon as you can, because that could be coming down the pipe. Rillinor is great in a perfection trigger deck. Tarvit's deck getting Rillinor out on turn 3 is possible if you have Tarvit's ability, and then you play Tactical Brilliance, or Tactical Brilliance and Tarvit's ability. You have to play it in that order. He's going to reduce him to a 3 cost, and you throw this guy out. Now you've got a 4/7 with shield that you're not necessarily going to attack with. And the reason being is because you want to keep him alive and start dropping perfection troops. And that's on turn 3. So turn 4, you drop this guy, Idachin Squad. Now you've done stun, 2 damage, and then Rillinor, every time they're triggering perfection, they're giving him +2/+2. Again, another card that ups the attack and health of your troops. It's a little contingent. However, if you're building your deck with perfection in mind, it's very easy. And then all of a sudden that 3/3 is a 5/5, and 5/5s are nice. They stick around a little bit longer, and that's just on turn 4. Not to mention the 4/7 that your opponent really has to deal with. They can't ignore that. Turn 5, let's say you manage to drop another perfection troop, or you drop a Mycelin jet bikes, and now these guys here are not only a 5/4, now they're a 7/6. I mean, the potential, Agneman being a 9/7, Rillinor is just a great supportive, he's bringing wisdom, he's buffing things up, he's telling them how to be perfect and how to really improve themselves, and they believe it, and they feel good about themselves, and they get out there. I would say out of the 2 epics or 2 legendary cards that you're going to see in the shop for Emperor's Children, Rillinor, Pride of the Emperor, those are the 2 that you must buy, save up for. You might not use Rillinor in every deck. You're not going to. But if you're building your deck for perfection, you want him in your deck. There's no downside to that. Even at a 6 cost with Emperor's Children, that's still a very viable point in the game to play. He can technically be out, two or 3 turns ahead of that. So that's not a downside at all. Now, Corrupted Battleship is interesting. Corrupted Battleship deals 2 damage to all enemies. It costs 1 less for each enemy troop in play. I used to run one of these before Artillery Strike was into the game, just as a way, because Defensive Satellites was kind of, you didn't know what you were going to get. Now Artillery Strike, you know that you're going to get 2, so that costs 3 less. Now it doesn't deal it to all enemies, it deals it to 3 random enemies, but that's better. Yes, this could potentially be a 1-cost card if your opponent has 6 troops on the table. That's possible. But at that point in the game, I don't know if you're in a good standing. I mean, if you let them get 6 troops out on their turn, that might not bode well for you to begin with. So it's not bad. I don't frown when I get it with Fulgrim if it's generated. But in terms of building a deck for it, I think at this point, for its cost and for what it does, there are other cards that are arguably on par, if not better than that, for cheaper, for sure. So if you're looking to do some more damage, and it's not bad, 2 damage is better than 1 damage. It's just, it's a real toss-up. It depends on what you've got available to you. If you don't have too many options, and that's the only one that you've got, then go for it, but it's not going to close you out games. Speaking of closing out games, this is the end game for Emperor's Children. This is what they do. This is how they do it. This is how they do it. I'm a terrible singer. I don't know why I did that. That's terrible. I'm going to sit here and feel bad about that. 7 for 7. 7 for 7 damage. And on turn 7, it goes back to your hand. Now, it's been changed. Initially, it just returned to your hand. Now it returns to your hand with -1 cost and -1 damage. But what that is right there is 2 turns dealing 13 damage. So it's the end game for the Emperor's Children. The Sons of Horus have Vengeful Spirit. Emperor's Children have Pride of the Emperor. And it is the clock that you need to keep mentally in the back of your mind. If you are at 13 health, or you're at 15 health, and you have the very likelihood that you are going to take at least a 2 attack from your opponent's Warlord, you know that you need to make plays to end the game quickly. Because if you are in that late stage of that game, especially if you are at 7 health, you are playing with luck every turn that your opponent survives. Because if they draw that, it's game over. They could technically start this out as early as turn 4 if they play Tarvitz and Tactical Brilliance. It's a little bit of an overplay, but it can be done. The problem with Pride of the Emperor, and the only problem really, is using it too much too soon. If you're using it just to deal damage, and gives your opponent, and they still have plenty of health, and they can drop more troops on the table, then you don't have anything else on the table because you've spent 7 energy to play that. So your ability to answer whatever they put on the table is reduced, which means the next turn, are you going to use the 6, or are you going to be behind and drop stuff onto the table? Or is the 6 just enough to win the game? It depends. Most people, you play this, they can see the end coming, but you have to think a turn ahead of that. Because, for instance, you've got 15 health, you think you're safe, may not necessarily have your troops. You go for the attack. They drop this. So now you went from 15 to 13 because you did an attack for 2 for 2. Let's just say it's an even exchange. So now you're at 13 health. This just basically means that if you can't kill them on your next turn, your game's over. You put yourself below that window. They deal 7 to you. Now you're at 6. They don't even have to hit you with their warlord. They can just sit back, and if you can't kill them on their turn, it's game over. So it's the clock. It's the end game. It's a one of, but it is the one of. You see this in the shop. If you don't have it, get gems, buy it. If you plan on playing Emperor's Children, you can play Emperor's Children without Pride of the Emperor, but you will not have the same results without Pride of the Emperor. And that's not to downsize. I think a Rillinor Tarvet's Perfection deck, I think a Hall of Rights deck is very good. But that's the icing on the cake. That's the whole point. You throw out all those cheap stuff, your opponent gets frustrated. They're dealing with all that stuff. They're dealing with Mark of Chaos troops. They're dealing with amplified perfection troops. And all the while the clock's ticking. And then turn 7 comes and it's game over. That's the way this works. That's the way the Emperor's Children work. That's their perfection. That's their pride of the Emperor. So, the number 1 card for the Emperor's Children to have. Now, Sardarin, I like the ability for him. When you really think about it, he's a 6/8. Okay, that's good. He's a 7 cost. That's costly. He has shield. Okay, he's susceptible to being bounced. He's susceptible to straight outright destruction. But if your opponent can't kill him, his battle honor is he gains shield. So he takes 3 health maybe off of the first attack that he does. So then he becomes a 6/5 with shield. And unless they get rid of him again, he stays a 6/5 with shield because he's going to kill something else. Unless he's going straight for your opponent's warlord, or unless you're using him. So I mean, he's the Terminator. He's the Terminator squad right there. That's what they do. There's no perfection there to it. It's just straight beef and power. I've seen these more played in event decks, I think mainly because of the cost of the unit itself and the disposability of the unit. But they're a good closer. If you can get them out turn 5, that's pretty powerful. Is it the best turn 5 move? It remains to be seen. Turn 5 is that straight outright destruction point in the game. So vulnerable, but if they can survive it, then they really make an impact. Now, Eidolon replaced Lucius in this spot as a 9/9. Lucius was a 9/9. Was he a 7/7? I think he was a 9/9. It's hard. My memories of Lucius as a troop are getting fuzzy. That's sad. Eidolon has been in the game as an event commander who has an ability that's very similar to this. When attacking, stun the target. That was his ability, and he also had a 2 energy, reduce the cost of a random card in your hand by 1, if I remember correctly, which was a terrible ability. Stunning is great. 8/9/9 is great, but he's very susceptible to so many things that get rid of him, destroy him, bounce him, stun him, put other targets on the table that he has to hit rather than go through Warlord frontline. Stun a frontline. Okay, that's great. I'm not going to do anything with that frontline if it survives. By the way, I think there's maybe 2 frontline troops that might survive at 9/9, so that's debatable. He's not good. He's not good. He's not good. He's not, I mean, he's legendary. That's nice. But I would, it depends on your deck, I guess. It depends on your deck and your focus. I would make the argument to not include Eidolon, unless you just don't have anything else to close out the game. I would just go against it. And also, just as a side, I totally hate this character. I was really happy that he was killed, and then I got angry that Fabius Bile resurrected him. That just made me really mad. And where I'm at in reading in the book series, I hope he dies again, because he's just a dick. What a dick. Dick. Hammer of Justice. We're getting into these high cost cards that are not great. It's a rare. It's an 8/8/8/8. If you're starting the game and you're a new player, this could be a closer for you. For 3 energy, it can destroy a troop with 4 or less attack, which is not bad because it's straight outright destruction, but it's not going to work on the things that you really want it to work on, in which case usually you're just going to have to do a straight face strike with it. It's not bad, but it's not, as time goes on, this just becomes kind of a filler. It's not anything that you're going to use in the same way that these guys are. As a 9/9/10. And here's the thought process behind it. This is great. It's a Land Raider. It's a Land Raider squadron, for crying out loud. Jesus. Battle Honor. Gain a Mark of Chaos. This thing gains a Mark of Chaos. Does it need it? No. No, it doesn't need a Mark of Chaos at all. Although it would be really interesting if the Land Raider squadron gained Unstoppable and they could like fly over front lines. That's a bit much. But here's the whole point. Here's the reason why these high cost cards are not really the kid and caboodle for Emperor's Children. Because a good Emperor's Children deck, whether you're going with Changer Spam, Hall of Rights, Perfection Trigger, whatever the case may be, many, not all, but many of your cards are banking on triggering Perfection or comboing with a Perfection, whether it's Unbreakable Focus, whether it's drawn 2 cards, playing a bunch of low-cost cards and then finishing with a stun, whether it is just straight, something to drop your cost and then play Pride of Emperor a second time. The tactical execution of the Emperor's Children is basically, to some degree, banking on playing more than 1 card a turn, especially at turn 9 and 10. So by using a high cost card, that takes up that whole slot, and that's great. Some of these high cost cards are very good closers. Subjugator Titan is probably it's susceptible to all the same stuff. It can be destroyed, it can be bounced, it can be stunned, but I think you can't argue that 10/10/10/10 shield, cleave 10, cleave 10, cleave 10. Oh, you have a front line next to your Warlord? I don't care. I'm still doing 10 to your Warlord. I think that's the highest cleave in the game. It's a legendary. That's great. It's an epic closure. Oh, okay. I have 2. I have 2 legendaries that I don't have. I forgot I didn't have these guys. I'm not missing them. I'm not missing them because it's a 10 cost. I would rather play 2 to 3 cards at 10 turn as opposed to 1 card that doesn't do me anything that turn. That's the thought process. Now, that's not just because of where the game is at right now. That's because it's built into this Legion, into how their cards combo, that's the reward. The reward isn't playing those combos. The reward isn't playing the execution and the multiple card setups. There is, you could argue, a reward for a 10/10 closer. However, playing 1 card that can easily be dealt with by 4 or 5 cards that your opponent may possess, as opposed to playing 4 or 5 cards that your opponent either has to deal with or has a negative effect against your opponent, either via damage, stunning, or any such thing, has multiple implications that your opponent has to react to, as opposed to 1 that your opponent has to react to. Now, that argument can be said across the board for many of the decks out there right now, Raven Guard and World Eaters, to some degree. To some. Not as much in terms, as much as so as the Emperor's Children. And that goes with any of their deck builds. So that's why these high cost cards are really cool to look at, really neat, And as a newer player, they're really exciting, especially if you get one. If you have one of these as a newer player and that's your first legendary is Eidolon, you're playing against people who probably don't have any other legendaries or who may only have one legendary. So that's great. You bust that out. People will freak. The first time that you summon a greater demon, the Slayer of Worlds, because you threw down 4 marks of chaos, you know how you felt. You felt good about it. You knew your opponent freaked, even though they couldn't really respond other than just the generic built-in, responses in the game. It felt good. Maybe they disconnected and you didn't get the full satisfaction of it. But the point is, it feels good as a new player. But as a competitive player, as we were playing later in the game, in the higher tiers of the game, these cards just become decoration. They're not as useful. Yes, they're useful in event decks. Yes, they're useful if you're going with some sort of flavor and you just want to throw it in there because it's only a one of. But ultimately, the reward is in the multiple combos, because that is what builds the control. That's what builds the advantage. That's what builds the momentum. So that's why I'm down on these cards. It's a shame, really, when you think about it, that the Emperor's Children actually have 2 high-cost, not so great high-cost legendaries. Now, you could say that the same is true for the Sons of Horus. If we take a look over here, they've got 3. But Melgahurst is a 7, and his ability is, as we've mentioned in the previous video, is just a great ability, whether you attack with him or not. His ability to copy any tactic being played, including ones that are used to destroy him, that's just that almost shuts your opponent down from playing tactics. So that's a great ability. And then Vengeful Spirit deals the damage. That's their closer. So the 9, the Punisher, is not necessary or needed at all. So 2 of those are actually viable use because they're dealing the closing out damage, or they're shutting something down, whereas opposed to Emperor's Children, where the 2 that you've got here do nothing the turn they come in and require, like, they do nothing. Like, Shield is great for the Subjugator Titan if your opponent had another beefy, like an Eidolon or something like that, because he's not going to take any damage if you attack him if they don't have any other troops. But there's no rally there. There's no shutting off the ability or raising the cost of tactics or any such thing. So Iron Column, Hammer of Justice fall much into the same. They just, once you get to that point in the game, you're going to find that the higher cost stuff, especially with Emperor's Children, where you want to be able to play lots of stuff as opposed to one, that's just where it's going to take you. So anyways, that takes us through the Emperor's Children. That's some of the thought process that I have, just kind of stream of consciousness coming off there at the end. But that's the card pool for the Emperor's Children. I think they always have been one of the best legions in terms of this game. Arguably, in terms of fluff, I mean, they were the only legion that the Emperor actually gifted his sigil to. That says a lot about these guys in terms of their pride, in terms of their perfection, in terms of how they executed things out. And I think the game does them justice. We'll see as the game goes on how these progress, if they retain where they're at. I mean, as a legion, they have the potential to defy the curve and operate wonderfully below the curve, or operate perfectly at the curve of the game and the turns where you're at. So if you're looking to start out in the game and you've got Sons of Horus and you want to try something new, I would recommend the Emperor's Children. I don't think you'll have a bad experience with them. You might have to grow your card pool some. Every legion does. They're going to have cards that you just need to have. But the way they play feels rewarding to execute the combos. It feels really rewarding to just have that steamroll concept in terms of gaining advantage just for playing cards at the right time. And they are versatile. You can play them a variety of ways. Again, this is just the Legion stuff, so you combo it in with the neutral card pool that's out there, and things really open up. Whether it be Mechandrites, whether it be Frontline, whether it be Mechanicum, whether it be Chaos Direct Damage. Usually it's Chaos Direct Damage. Great Legion. So, anyways, that is it for me. That's where I'm at. We're testing Fulgrim here right now. We've got ourselves a little striving for perfection. I don't have any Emperor's Children card backs. This is it for me. But you know what? Oh, you can assign those to current decks now? Oh man. Snap. Now I can variety my card decks. Anyways, strive for perfection. Keep playing Legions. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Next time we are going to be taking a look at the Death Guard, the last of the 4 original Legions in the game. Trying to get content out as quickly as possible. We've got another set coming out here soon. I'd like to get through the next 4 Legions as quickly as possible, so bear with me. I'd like to get this stuff out. I like talking about it. I've got more to talk about beyond just the Legions, and let's go into it. But yeah, so that's it for me. Keep playing Legions. All right, bye.